Helo a chroeso I gynhadledd ddigidol Engage for Success Cymru 2020. Bydd e'n gynhadledd yn canolbwyntio ar ymgysylltu â gweithwyr a bydd ni'n canolbwyntio ar bob un o'r 4 galluogwr ymgysylltu â gweithwyr drwy lens y 7 nod llesiant o fewn y 10 llesiant cenedlaethau'r dyfodol yng Nghymru. Hello and welcome to Engage for Success Wales's Digital Conference 2020. Our conference will focus on employee engagement and we'll be shining a light on each of the 4 enablers of employee engagement through the lens of the 7 well-being goals of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act in Wales. This year, we are delighted to be bringing this to you in association with Business News Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn. In 2009, the MacLeod report was published. Its authors, David MacLeod and Mita Clark, were commissioned to conduct research into high-performing organisations across all sectors. And to elicit what these high-performing organisations had in common, their research found that there were 4 common themes. Firstly, they had visible, empowering leadership which provided a strong, strategic narrative about the organisation, where it had come from and where it was going. Secondly, each organisation had engaging managers who focused on their people, who coached and stretched them to reach their potential, and who treated each person as an individual. Thirdly, there was a strong employee voice throughout the organisations. Employees were seen as central to the solution, to be involved, listened to, and invited to contribute their experience, expertise, and ideas. Finally, they had organisational integrity, meaning that the values on the wall were genuinely reflected in day-to-day behaviours. There was no say-do gap, promises made were promises kept, or an explanation was given as to why not. These 4 common themes of strategic narrative, engaging managers, employee voice, and organisational integrity were defined as the 4 enablers of engagement. But why does employee engagement matter? It matters because there is a direct correlation between levels of employee engagement and levels of productivity, revenue growth and net profit, employee turnover, customer satisfaction, innovation, efficiency, and even health and safety. The analysis of evidence shows only around 1/3 of UK employees say they are actively engaged. 20 million workers are not delivering their full capability or realising their potential at work. 64% of people say they have more to offer in skills and talents than they are currently being asked to contribute at work. There is no doubt that 2020 has been economically challenging, with a slump in GDP and a huge increase in unemployment. This area of employee engagement is something within our influence to change, something that can assist in business growth at a time when so many businesses are under huge pressures. On behalf of Engage for Success Wales, may I thank Cardiff and Vale College for sponsoring this session. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Finally, our conference is a not-for-profit venture. All attendance is free and profits will be donated to our partner charity, Daring to Dream. Donations can be made via www.daringtodream.wales and will help support the emotional health and well-being of patients in Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Pnawn da, bawb, a chroeso mawr i'r sesiwn hyn ar arweinyddiaeth a chysylltu ag arweinyddiaeth. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session on Engaging Leadership, a route map for leadership that builds engagement. My name is Carwyn Jones. I'm a member of the Welsh Parliament, or at least I will be, until April of next year. I was First Minister of Wales for 9 years, 9 years before that in various ministerial roles, so 18 years in total in government, which is why in 2018 I decided that enough was enough. I'm now a Professor of Law at Aberystwyth University. I sit on various boards, and one of the things that I do is I produce and present a podcast for the digital media website, Business News Wales, and that is the role which I'm fulfilling today, amongst other things. I'm delighted to be joined by 2 very distinguished guests, and in a moment I'll simply ask them to introduce themselves. They will be well known to some of you, but nevertheless, I'm sure that they will be able to add to your knowledge of themselves. If I could turn first then to our first guest, Mita Clark. Mita, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for asking me and my my what you might say, work husband, David, to come and talk about engagement. I mean, just so that people know, my background is I was 17 years an official with Unison, the public sector trade union. I had some 7 years at Number 10 working for Tony Blair as his advisor on trade union and employment issues. David and I then co-wrote the report on employee engagement 2008-9 called Engaging for Success. And we've been working together on the basically shining a light on good practice of employee engagement and bringing the importance of it, in front of organizations and individuals. And it's been a fantastic journey establishing the Engage for Success movement. And we could never have predicted that it would become such a critical and key issue, could we, David?
David, welcome to you, and perhaps you could give us just a brief introduction to yourself.
Well, thank you very much, and hi everybody, and delighted to make a small contribution. So my background is in consumer marketing. I then managed businesses across Europe, and finally a global business, which was a division of an even larger company. And I noticed through this 25, 30 years that there was a quality in certain people that meant they challenged, they owned, they delivered. And there was a quality in other people, but they didn't do those things. And it was indefinable. The soft issue got me incredibly interested in it. I wrote a book on it, and I was lucky enough then to be asked to work with Mita for the report that she mentioned in the last 10 years, trying to push this topic along for the benefit of organizations, well-being of people, and indeed our countries.
Thank you both. Let's move on then to a little bit of background to frame our conversation this afternoon. Many people may or may not have heard of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is legislation here that was passed in Wales in 2015. What is it? Well, it requires public bodies in Wales to think about the long-term impact of their decisions to work better with people, with communities, and with each other, and to prevent persistent problems such as poverty, health inequality, of course, and climate change. It does this through identifying 7 well-being goals. They are a prosperous Wales, a resilient Wales, a more equal Wales, a healthier Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities, a Wales of vibrant culture and a thriving Welsh language, and a globally responsible Wales. So 7 goals there that the Act outlines. It also, of course, threads the Sustainable Development Principle through public life in Wales. It defines sustainable development as the process of improving the economic, social, environmental, and cultural well-being of Wales by taking action in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle aimed at achieving the well-being goals. What does that mean in terms of practicality? Well, it identifies 5 ways of working. Firstly, thinking long-term. The importance of balancing short-term needs with the needs to safeguard the ability to also meet long-term needs. Integration, considering how the public body's well-being objectives may impact upon each of the well-being goals on their objectives or on the objectives of other public bodies. Thirdly, involvement, the importance of involving people with an interest in achieving the well-being goals and ensuring that people are fully reflective of the diversity of the area which the body serves. Fourthly, collaboration, acting in collaboration with any other person or different parts of the body itself that could help the body to meet its well-being objectives. And fifthly, and finally, prevention, how to prevent problems occurring or getting worse. That, of course, will help public bodies caught by the Act to meet their objectives. All very well, you might say, how is all this measured and how is it, at the end of the day, enforced? Well, the Auditor General of Wales, as well as auditing the accounts of Welsh public bodies, also undertakes examinations of the extent to which public bodies have applied the Sustainable Development Principle when setting and pursuing well-being objectives. And that the first report was published in 2020, this year, of course, and it includes a measurement of progress as to how the 5 ways of working are being taken forward. On top of that, there's also a Future Generations Commissioner, whose job it is to make sure that the Act itself, of course, is kept to, but also, of course, to make sure that what the law says, what the legislation says, actually becomes something tangible, something that people can see, and importantly, something that makes a positive difference to people's lives. That is many, many months of creating a bill I was part of and an act explained in 3 minutes. It doesn't give you much of an idea of how long it took to do it, but nevertheless, that is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act Wales. Now let's move on then to our concluding conversation. It'll focus on the Engage for Success movement, the 4 enablers of employee engagement, and the relevance of the wellbeing goals in place in Wales to provide a platform to assist engagement and in turn, of course, enhance productivity, business growth, and the economy. So now I'm going to turn to our 2 guests. If I could start with you, first of all, David. Employee engagement, we all think that we know what this is, but from your perspective, what does employee engagement actually mean?
Well, really good question. And I think we stopped counting, didn't we, Nita, at 64 definitions of employee engagement written by various organizations and so on. But we did feel there was a very strong theme that underlined them all. And I think it's this. There is a level of capability and potential in me, in you, and everybody. And if you put me in one situation, you get at a small part of what I'm capable of offering, and I develop to some extent. If you put me in a much better situation where I'm much more engaged, you get at much more of what I'm capable of offering, maybe everything I'm capable of offering, and I develop much more fully. And if we have people who are using their capability, owning issues, giving great customer service, innovating, if they're owning the stuff in front of them, then the organizations tend to be more successful, and indeed it enhances well-being. So that theme of enhancing, enabling people to offer their capability and potential is a theme that runs through all these definitions, we think.
Those 2 words, Nita, people think are easy to explain. They've probably got some idea of what employee engagement means. But of course, turning that into something people can see on the ground, something practical, something that's meaningful, is another task. From your perspective, how do you take what seems to be, on the face of it, a simple concept, but turn it into something where people can see positive results?
So the way I look at it is this. Fundamentally, when you're at work, in working environments, it's the people, stupid. I mean, you will remember that in the past, political leaders have been told to focus on the thing that really matters. Well, in my view, in organizations, it doesn't really matter how good your capital equipment or your investment or your IT systems or whatever are. If the people who work in the organization either don't care enough or are not enabled to use all that stuff. And for so many organizations, you know, the potential performance and productivity is just wasted. It's as if they're standing on top of the building, sort of chucking money away. Because if we said to a chief finance officer, oh, it's okay, excuse me, if your computers only work a third of the time, they'd think you were completely mad. So then how come it's okay that in organization after organization and country after country, only about a third of the workforce are actively engaged? I mean, what an incredible waste of the potential of the people concerned, but what a waste for the organization and for the country. So in my view, organizations that focus on people as the solution rather than as the problem, you know, are those organizations who will maximize the effectiveness and the contribution of their workforce.
And why is employee engagement important from your perspective?
Well, firstly, I think it's important for the individual because I don't know, anybody who's been in a work environment where they have felt bullied or underrated, the impact that it has on you as a person, right, is huge. And thank God we're starting to talk about mental well-being. And we know that dysfunctional relationships at work are one of the major causes of mental ill health, all right? So it's very, very bad for the individual if I am unappreciated or not treated well at work. But it's very bad for the organization because they are missing out on everything that I could bring if I was engaged and appreciated and developed. And so it's very, very bad for performance and productivity. And, you know, we're getting consultants to work out how we can improve performance. But often there's a solution right in front of you. And that solution is, absolutely maximizing the effectiveness of your workforce in a good way, not in a, kind of whipping people kind of way. And if you put all of this together, how important is it for the countries? Because as we all know, productivity, and particularly now after, as we come through the pandemic and the consequences of Brexit, absolutely having organizations working at their best is going to be critical for the economic survival of all our countries.
David, if I could come to you, there might be people listening who might say, well, surely success in business depends on good management and direction. It isn't necessary to talk to employees, but clearly from your perspective and from Mita's perspective, it's important. Why does it matter, would you say, to businesses to be able to have that effective level of employee engagement?
Well, look, there's only really four ways to improve business, and human beings are at the heart of addressing each of them. We've got to innovate for competitive advantage. Well, it's a massive people, team-based approaches are the ones that tend to succeed. I know the first half of my career was all about innovation, and those engaged employees find ways to do things better. They open up new markets, they give fabulous customer service, or they find more efficient ways to do what we do. Now, it's people are at the heart of creating those successful organizations. So it's good for the organization when we all care and own and don't walk past things that aren't working. We tackle things in front of us. When people are doing that, the organization is more successful. And also, we'll talk about this later, when there's employee voice, the likelihood of doing something stupid, like launching a new range of fax machines or something, is reduced because there is employee voice, which tends to encourage an organization, to do more sensible things. And lastly, work is tiring. We don't go anywhere, do we, Nita, where you come across people saying it's all a walk in the park. The question is, when they go home in the evening, they go home tired because work's demanding, but do they go home frustrated, tired, and take it out on the partner or the kids or the cat? Or do they go home just tired to do the next thing, which is indulge in a hobby, watch the telly, play with the kids, whatever it is? And so the atmosphere at work seeps out into life in general. So it certainly tackles well-being and the massively important objectives Wales has set itself, which we thoroughly applaud. It seeps out into more than just the work situation, though it's central to the work situation.
Let's move on then, having established what employee engagement is, to what it can deliver for businesses. In particular, areas such as productivity, revenue growth, net profit, employee turnover, customer satisfaction, innovation, all the things that are important to any successful business. Mita, if I turn to you, there are businesses who will be listening today who will say, okay, we get the idea in terms of what employee engagement is, but how can that make us a better business in terms of what we're trying to do?
Well, I mean, it gives you a competitive advantage in the sense that people are going to come and want to work for you. I mean, in the old days, it was a bit hit and miss when you applied for a job, wasn't it? You didn't really know about what was going on in the organization. Now we have, Glassdoor and all these other websites which tell the unvarnished truth about what it's like to work somewhere. So if you want to attract, the best people, you're going to need to have an external reputation that kind of matches your internal reputation. It's no good saying, we're absolutely brilliant if people who work for you are, pointing out all the pitfalls and the difficulties and dangers. So, I mean, there is definitely a sense of the importance of this for competitive advantage. But also think about it. If you have a high turnover, how much are you spending on training staff? All right. They say anything up to 3/4 of an annual salary goes on recruiting staff. So, I mean, how much money is being wasted if you've got a high turnover? You're having to retrain and retrain people because they're leaving. And how much are you having to, what's the effect of people going off sick all the time? And again, this whole, thank God we're talking about mental health, but just the ramifications for the organization, not engaging with staff is extremely costly. And it brings a reputational risk with you, because look at all the publicity that there's been recently about the spotlight has been on organizations and how they behave through the pandemic. And those organizations that have behaved badly and treated their staff badly, they are up there in a kind of spotlight that no organization wants to be in. And people will remember, people will remember whether the whole values-based approach that you're talking about in Wales, people will remember if organizations did that or didn't do it. So there's a real return on investment on this, but there's a real potential cost if you don't do it.
And in some ways, Anita, an element of public pressure, I suppose. You mentioned Glassdoor there and other websites. It's a question of making sure that people are comfortable when they apply for a job somewhere, because if they're comfortable, then the talent pool that's available to any particular business is bound to be deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is increasingly important. And, although we're in a position where clearly unemployment is going up, we're also in a position where particular skill sets are going to be even more valued. And, therefore, as I say, becoming an employer of choice is going to be of critical importance. It will be things like, exactly as you said, do I feel comfortable at work? Do I feel appreciated at work? Is the working environment one where I feel I can flourish and grow and bring my best? Am I well? Do I have opportunities for career development? All of those things are critically important, particularly for the younger generation. Now, they're important for everybody, but I think there is evidence that what younger people, skilled people, are looking for from work is not necessarily the same as a 9-to-5 job for 35 years with a retirement clock at the end of it. I think they are looking for different things, and organizations, who don't think about all of this in the context of engagement, I think are going to be missing out.
David, how can we measure the success of employee engagement? Is there evidence out there? Are there metrics out there that can show us that? And are there examples of businesses where the right level of employee engagement has led to them being better businesses?
Yes, look, there's lots of evidence, either big meta studies or studies focused on it, and lots of anecdotal evidence. And for instance, if you look at productivity, there was a massive study done, I think about 20,000 business units, and they found that productivity was 18% higher in the top quartile of engaged organizations compared to the bottom quartile. They found that revenue growth was twice as high for the engaged organizations as the less engaged. There's a professor of finance at London Business School who's correlated under controlled conditions, has correlated the relationship between being good places to work, ticking the Glassdoor criteria, as it were, and their return on shareholder return. So there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of evidence between engaged hospitals giving better medical outcomes. Or there was a borough in London that had one of the worst policing outcomes and moved to one of the best policing outcomes by focusing on the four things we're about to talk about. There are plenty of organizations. One that we came across that sticks in my mind, they were going bust in the last recession, and they got smaller organizations. They got everybody together, they leveled, they talked about where they were, they showed the money running out of the bank, everyone pulled together, they got through, and now they're succeeding. So whether you're public sector or private sector or not-for-profit sector, the evidence is very compelling on specific issues and on overall issues. Health and safety, which is a very big part of my life when I worked at ICI. Again, the correlation between engaged employees offering safe environments was very, very compelling. So I think the evidence is very clear, but the implementation, the belief in it, is still needing to grow. And I would just finish by saying there is some evidence, I think we feel, that the good employers are getting better because they recognize what we're talking about, but the bad employers are getting worse because they are kind of reverting to command and control and really hacking off their employees with all sorts of horror stories of asking them to put in software so they can tell how many clicks they've done when they're working from home, and terrible stories of that kind of thing. So it's really encouraging us to recognize we are at a crossroads, And given the challenges Nita mentioned, we know which one we've got to take if we're going to look forward to a confident future for organizations and for our countries.
Yes, let's move on then to the 4 enablers of engagement and their value, of course, as a framework or a route map to guide those in leadership roles. Now, I know that you selected 2 each to focus on. I'm going to come to you first, David, if I may. You've selected 2 of the enablers. Take us through them.
Okay, all right. Well, briefly. So just a word of introduction. We spent a year, a really hard-working, focused year going around all sorts of organizations, public, private, not-for-profit. And whenever they seem to be making a good fist of this, these 4 things continually suggested themselves, continued revealed themselves. And over the years, we built on them. So the first 2 were these. They're not in any order. These organizations, they have a story that employees can hold in their heads about where we've come from, where we are today with our strengths and weaknesses, and where we aspire to go in the future. And it's not loud hailed at them just by the bosses. It's something we've had a hand in creating. It's something we believe in. It's something we own. And these organizations put this in place a whole variety of different ways. They do storyboards on it. They talk about it. Even seen organizations do little plays of how they want to feel about things in the future. So when there's this, we called it strategic narrative. When there's a narrative, people can hold in their heads, they can relate their job to it. It's inspiring. It gives them purpose. There's more and more emerging from the literature now about the need for purpose, why you get out of bed, what I'm content. Young people are even stronger on it, which is fantastic. So this story, this narrative that we all own, have a hand in creating preferably, but certainly a hand in how to implement, runs through it like a kind of stick of rock for an organization. It's a guiding star. The second thing that we found is we nearly all work for somebody. We have a manager we work for. And there was some research a while ago in the States that 62% of all people in America would prefer a new boss to a pay rise. Now, I think the statistics are probably not dissimilar here. So what are the managers doing? The people we work for, whether we're the most junior or we're the COO, these people we work for, what do they do? And we found there were things that they were doing. These effective managers were working to create real clarity about what success looks like in the role and giving people some scope to bring their creativity, their energy to delivering that. The second is the 2 worst words in the management lexicon are, in our view, human resources. I am not a human resource. I am not human capital. I'm an individual. And these managers treat their people as individuals. They might help them with their career aspiration. They might try and be practically helpful if they need childcare support by coming an hour later and staying late, whatever it is. They're working with their people as human beings, as individuals. And the last thing we found these managers doing was this. They're coaching their people continuously, not some great orchestrated 1-hour week, but nice and natural in the moment. They're giving constant feedback. They're giving extra emphasis to the things we do well because we'd like to be affirmed. We're British. We've had the gene removed called the ability to give spontaneous, enthusiastic feedback. We need to put that gene back in so that people feel somebody's noticed. And equally, they do not walk past dysfunctional behavior. They address things that need addressing, but hopefully in a positive light. So those are 2 things: a story about where we're going, a purpose, something we relate to, and the person I work for treating me as a human being, helping me to develop and helping me to ensure there's great clarity about what success will look like.
So the third thing we identified in organizations that took engagement seriously and were doing it well was that they listened to employee voice. Now, a lot of organizations say to us, oh, we're brilliant at employee voice. You know, we have a communications cascade that is second to none. And we have to explain this is not about communicating, important though that is. This is about listening. How do you listen to your staff? Now, as part of that, it's incredibly important that organizations that have trade unions, have partnership relations with them that enable them to really listen to trade unions and allow trade unions to to contribute properly. But in any organization, whether there are unions there or not, it's also critically important that there are mechanisms for employee voice. Now, I don't just mean an annual survey. Surveys are fine, don't get me wrong, but they only tell you a snapshot about what people may be feeling, if they're good enough for surveys. They don't tell you why people are feeling it, and you need to know that. So there are a whole range of things that people can do now, including using the kind of media we're using today to really listen to staff. So listen about the job that they're doing, because to be honest with you, if you want to know how to do something better, it's usually a pretty good idea to ask the person who's doing it rather than necessarily bring in McKinsey. So that's point number one. So listen to people about the job that they do, but listen to them about their views of the organization, all right, about how successful they think it is, about how it's impacting on their communities. Because, of course, people who work for you are also people in the community. So having a sense of employee voice, and I tell you this, it is a damn sight cheaper to listen to your employees, because if they trust you, and I'll come on to that in a second, they will tell you what is going on in the organization. If you look at every public scandal that there's ever been, every report there's ever been, okay, into what's gone wrong into organizations, what are they? The one thing they have in common is somebody always knew. People in the organization knew what was going on. They just didn't talk about it. Either they didn't care enough, or frankly, they were too scared because there was a culture of bullying and harassment, and people were too scared to speak up. Now, it's a lot cheaper than bringing in lawyers and communications specialists to clear up after the mess. Don't let the mess happen. Listen to your employees, because they are the best guard that you have against reputational risk, in all honesty, particularly in this day and age with the kind of openness and transparency of social media. So listening to employee voice has never been more important. And I think, again, the experience in the pandemic has demonstrated that listening and that social partnership, has been absolutely critical. And the fourth thing is this. I mean, we called it integrity. In other words, do the values on the wall that you say you are as an organization, are they actually reflected in the day-to-day behaviors? Because it's terribly simple to put a set of 6 values on a mouse mat, or on a laminated board on the wall. But are they lived in the organization? So are people called to account for behaving inappropriately? Is there accountability in the organization? Is it riven with cliques when everybody talks about, of course we work collaboratively? Because if there's a mismatch between the two, what does that do? It builds mistrust. I don't trust an organization which says that it behaves in one way, but in reality behaves in another. And none of this engagement will work ultimately if you don't have a culture of respect and trust. And trust, as we all know, is very hard to get, and boy, vanishes pretty quickly, if things go wrong. So having organizations that are built on integrity and trust, is absolutely critical. It's the kind of what you might call it. It's the oil that makes all of this work. So those are the overall the 4 enablers, and you can see absolutely how they fit together. These are not kind of 4. How can one put it? These are not part of a kind of 4-square template. These are the components that go to make a healthy, living, and appropriate culture in a workplace.
Thanks, both. So we've looked at the 4 enablers. Let's see now how the Future Generations Act might be able to assist with employee engagement and ultimately, of course, to increase productivity from that perspective. How do you see the Future Generations Act here in Wales working in terms of being able to promote employee engagement? I'll come to you first, David, if I may.
Well, I think that it's a tremendous initiative. It's fundamental, isn't it? Because all the financial metrics are in a sense a derived demand for a sense of well-being. It's hard to have a sense of well-being if we have no dosh at all. So we're not floating free. So in order that we can have that sense of well-being, we need successful organizations that provide healthy, attractive, involving places of work where I feel fulfilled, I develop myself, and to start to measure the things that the Welsh Government has set out to measure offers some hard power and some very powerful soft power in encouraging people to take these things more seriously. Because if we can create these engaged workplaces, as we said earlier on, it will spill over into home life. There will be a better sense of well-being, which affirms people. And once you've got that better sense of well-being, people are more ready to reach out. They're more ready to make a contribution. They're more ready to play their part in civic life. So it's a glue that holds everything together. And the way that Wales has decided to pick this up and focus on it and run it is inspiring. I think it's terribly, terribly important, and it's fantastic that it's not one of the short-term headline-grabbing things. It's something that we start now, and long-term, and over time, it seeps into how we do things around here.
Of course, in politics, we never do anything that's short-term and headline-grabbing. I think that's very clear, of course. From your perspective, how do you see the Act being able to help yourself and businesses in Wales to be able to take forward the four enablers?
Well, look, I think the really key thing here is this is a values-based initiative, and how refreshing is it, to find a government that is willing to, to put its heart on its sleeve, but also have very practical things to back it up that are values-based. I mean, I just think it's a wonderful initiative. I really do. I think it's world-leading. You are absolutely to be congratulated for doing this, because once you start inserting values, the importance of values, the importance of how we treat each other, well-being, sustainability, and all of those things into the national conversation, it then has to be reflected at employer level. And it doesn't matter whether you're public, private, or third sector. It remains the case that, as in account, you've got these guiding principles against which you can judge the effectiveness of what you are doing on a day-to-day basis, or your commercial or your social policy aspirations. I think it's a fantastic, because it gives you, I think David used the phrase well, it gives you a kind of guiding star, and I think that as David says, we're sometimes quite reticent to talk about values and how we feel and so on. Whereas putting this front and center, I think it's a huge challenge, but it's a hugely positive thing. And the fact that you're not just saying it, but you're looking at metrics as to how to deliver it. And it would be very interesting to see, as part of this, metrics looking at workplace well-being, the effectiveness of listening to employee voice, social partnership at work, all of those things. It would be nice to get those built in as part of the strands of work that you talked about. And I think if there's anything Engage for Success can do to work with you to help that happen, we would be absolutely delighted, because it is such it is such a fantastic initiative that embodies everything that we've said and talked about. So you are really to be congratulated.
That's one quick question as we draw to a close, and that is, I'm a member of the public. I may have heard or not of the Future Generations Act. I would agree with employee engagement. What one thing could you point at to say to me, this is what employee engagement, working with the Future Generations Act, can actually deliver for you as an individual? David, if I could come to you first on that one.
But take it at two levels. The first level is, for years we've got far too just focused on analytics and smart objectives and KPIs. And if we can put the humanity back into business, it's human beings who are going to innovate, give fabulous customer service, open up new markets and do things more efficiently. So putting humanity, if all this effort puts the humanity back into business, what a fantastic thing to do. And then as the individual in that scenario, then you're back to the fact that as somebody said, Monday morning is no longer a trauma. Monday morning is just the next part of the week, because I'm growing, I'm developing. Yes, I'm being financially rewarded, but I feel fulfilled. And if we can have people, every person going to work, let's not get carried away with a song in their heart, but positively.
Well, it is Wales, David. If there's anywhere they're going to go to work with a song in their heart, it's going to be Wales.
It's Wales, yay!
Singing Manic Monday. Mita?
Look, I think just final word for me, I think from my point of view, work does not have to be rubbish. Work, our message to people is, you deserve and you can have a fulfilling workplace. It does not have to be, somewhere where, as David says, you dread going in on Monday. And, working together, employees and organizations, you can find a way of delivering something much better. And, the tools and so on are there. And we, Engage for Success, are delighted to help in that effort.
Well, thanks both. I'm going to give you both the rest now as I look to draw together the different strands of our conversation. There'll be those of you who are familiar with the TV series The Prisoner, which was shot in Portmire in North Wales, starred Patrick McGowan, came out in the 60s. And at the beginning of each episode, there's one line that sticks out, and that is where Patrick McGowan says, "I am not a number, I am a free man." They say man, but it applies to everybody. And that really sums up what we've been talking about, that people want to be treated as human beings, not as numbers. The human economics approach rather than the econometric approach, perhaps we could call it. And what we've discovered is that employee engagement is something that's not just nice to have, but will actually help a business in terms of it being more profitable, certainly more innovative, a business that is more successful, and ultimately a business that is seen as more caring, not just by employees, but also by the public. And so we see that employee engagement is something that is at the heart of a business, of a successful business anyway, and something that enables businesses to grow, but enables employees to grow as well. And you will all know as businesses that holding on to good staff is a challenge. The more they feel valued, the more they will want to stay with you. We then, of course, looked at the four pillars or four enablers of engagement. What do they mean? How do we take employee engagement and turn it into something that's understandable, that's visible, that's tangible, something that people can see? And Mita and David have gone through that with us, explaining to us how a business can make sure that employee engagement is not just something that looks nice on a piece of paper in a strategy document, but something that is woven through the culture of a business and something that makes a real difference to those people who work in a business and ultimately, of course, to the business's success in the commercial world. And of course, we looked at the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Now, of course, the Act itself applies to public bodies, but there's no reason why a private business can't take the well-being goals and also the ways of working on board in order for a business to be more successful, to ensure that there's better employee engagement and, of course, ultimately better productivity. And so, for those of you who've been listening today, either live or those who will listen later on, there are many questions for us, aren't there? How do we make sure that employees feel valued? How do we make sure that because of employees being valued, they are more innovative, they are happier, they are more productive as a result? People at the end of the day are human beings. Treat them as human beings, and they will respond in a far better way as if they're treated as numbers. So what questions can we take from today? Well, first of all, what do you think of the conversation? How do you want to put in place all the enablers that we've heard today? How do we make sure that what we've discussed becomes something tangible, where somebody can say, yeah, I can see how the Future Generations Act, I can see how employee engagement, I can see how the four enablers have made a positive difference to me as an individual. And as a result, I feel valued and I feel more productive in the place where I work. So that work isn't just a chore. Monday, how many songs we're going to talk about with Monday in it? I don't like Mondays. There we are. I won't go down that line. It's an entirely different theme in terms of what that song is about. But ultimately, it's all about how can we make work better as an endeavor, but also, of course, to make sure that businesses benefit from the value they attach to their employees and that their employees see it. So, well, what are you going to do as businesses? What will you do differently perhaps tomorrow than you would have done today? What have you learned from our conversations? These are all the things for us to digest in the future. In terms of listening, in terms of engaging with employees, what will you do as businesses to make sure that you're able to do that and to put into practice what you've heard today from our two very eminent speakers? Those are all challenges for yourselves as a business, but I hope we've been able to provide you with a great deal more flesh on the bones in terms of turning concepts into a reality on the ground that people can see, and ultimately that leads to people being valued more, and of course businesses being more productive. So it just falls to me now to thank Nita and David for joining us. What's been a very illuminating conversation. Nita, thank you for your contributions today.
Thank you very much for asking.
Not at all. And David, thank you very much for contributing to our conversation.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you all for listening today, for giving us your time. And I hope that you found the time we spent together productive, and of course, time that has been well spent in improving your businesses in the future. My name's Carwyn Jones. Have a good weekend. We'll see you all soon. And in the meantime, keep safe.
Ar ran Engage for Success Cymru, hoffwn ni ddiolch eto I bawb sydd wedi cyfrannu heddiw yn ogystal â noddwyr. Byddwn ni heb wedi gallu gwneud hyn hebddo chi. On behalf of Engage for Success Wales, may I again thank each of our conversationalists today, as well as our sponsors. We could not have done this without you. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Ni'n gobeithio bydd chi gallu fynychu'r sesiynau eraill a hefyd yn edrych ar y cynnwys ar-lein lle mae dewis o erthyglau ar gael. We hope you will tune in to our other sessions and also check out our content online, where we have a selection of articles. Diolch yn fawr iawn, cadwch yn ddiogel ac aroswch yn iach. Thank you, stay safe and stay well.